we just want to get started here soon. I know that the keynote ended a little bit late, but if maybe we'll give another minute or so, we can start coming in here. Those lights are bright. I need sunglasses. Yeah, just everyone can file in. That'd be great. You have 3 seconds to find a seat, then we kick you out. I'm joking, no. You in the hallway, let's go. Okay, I'll start off the session, so welcome everybody. Hopefully your JNUC and the keynote started great for everybody. This is just a quick housekeeping note for this whole Q&A kind of thing that we have going on. So this year, everyone here and online can participate via the JNUC app now. So if you take a moment to open your app, right, locate the session from the list, and then start submitting and upvoting questions. So you'll be able to see it. It's all within the app. And then later, at the end of the session, when we do Q&A, I'll be able to monitor the situation with my giant iPad and see which questions and what to ask and so forth. So that's just a quick update. On that note, welcome. My name's Rob. I'm introducing Katie English. We've known each other for years, and she's going to present for you what's next for MDM. So please welcome Katie.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for your patience during the extra long, extra packed keynote. And I know it's been kind of a packed morning already. So we're going to dive right into it. As Rob said, please feel free to use the app to add questions as we go. But this is what's next for MDM. And as Rob said, my name's Katie English. I work on the product team at Jamf. And I want to just sort of level set expectations right up top. And I'm going to say this a few times just to drive it on home. I do not have extra special knowledge of Apple's roadmap. So if I did, I wouldn't be standing on stage talking about it. But I want to actually use this opportunity to talk about kind of where we've been and what we've learned and where we're going based on that. And so here's the agenda for today. We are going to talk about a brief history of MDM as the protocol that we've come to know today. We're going to talk about the next iteration of MDM, and this already came up as a topic. Somebody was like, oh, I'm really excited about it. Declarative management, we are going to talk about that today. And then we'll talk about what's next as Apple evolves and Jamf extends that functionality, and also why this shouldn't freak you out. MDM is actually pretty cool, and it's going to add some new capabilities that you'll be able to take advantage of. And at the end of the session, the goal is that everybody is overcome with optimism that MDM is going to help them solve the problems that they really care about. So that's our session agenda. And to start off, we are going to take a brief refresher course on the history of MDM, which of course stands for Mobile Device Management. We're going to go in the Wayback Machine and think about prior to the MDM protocol, where the only Apple devices that you were managing were Macs. And when those Macs were managed by the Casper suite, at enrollment, they would get some local binaries. Those local binaries would have root privileges, and they would be able to retrieve data about the Mac to send back to a management server on a defined schedule. They'd also be able to tell the local client to take programmatic action by downloading packages and running local scripts. We called this the forced pull device management. And eventually, Apple did the Apple thing and innovated, and now we have mobile devices in the form of iPhones, and it took a few iterations of iPhone OS to get to what we call now iOS with iOS 4. That came out in 2010, and then we gained mobile device management capabilities, and I honestly think that some of us never recovered from this change, so we're going to ride it out together. The change in management style was actually necessitated by iOS almost never being physically connected to an actual network. And it was also heavily sandboxed in the system architecture, so you weren't going to get an agent with root level access that could periodically phone home to a management server. So we used to live with force-pull client communication, and now we've got push communication. Instead of a local agent periodically phoning home to a management server to ask, should I be doing something? How about now? We have a device that maintains a persistent outbound connection to Apple's core services. And when the management server queues something to happen, then it pings those core services and asks Apple to have the device phone home. And then the server is going to direct the device to do something, which might be receive a setting or a command or maybe install an app. This is MDM 101, and it's the tech that we've been using alongside the Jamf management framework for nearly 13 years. By the way, I found this post, this is delightful, posted in December of 2010 by some guy named Zach, who's listed as a new contributor. I'm sure he's got a bright future in device management. Anyway, the highlight of this post is about Casper Suite 8.0, and you're probably not going to be able to read that from where you are, so I will read it to you. The highlighted feature is related to mobile device management. The JSS can now fully manage for all of your iOS devices in addition to your OS X clients. 13 years later, and we are still using the combo of binary pull actions and MDM push commands. That's been Jamf Pro's model for literally 13 years now. Of course, the protocol has gotten some new tricks since then. You actually heard some of this during the keynote earlier today. Got heaps of new commands, tons of granular settings, and then in 2021, Apple said this. This is actually a screenshot from the WWDC session. The future of device management is declarative management. This is really quite definitive, even though at the time, in 2021, it only supported user-enrolled or BYO iOS devices. It offered limited benefit until the following year, WWDC 2022, where Apple announced that starting with OS releases in the fall of that year, all device types and enrollment types would be able to take advantage of declarative management, meaning iOS and iPadOS 16, as well as macOS Ventura. So here we are, a year after that, and Apple is still continuing to invest in this new declarative management protocol, which thankfully operates right alongside traditional MDM. So why is this so cool? Remember that traditional or legacy or imperative mobile device management relies on a device having a persistent connection to Apple and a management server asking Apple to have a managed device phone home to receive a command or a query. So the command might be, update your operating system. Or the command might be, apply this setting to connect to company Wi-Fi. Or install these managed apps. And then the subsequent query after you do these commands might be, what's your OS right now? Did you apply that Wi-Fi setting? Tell me what apps you have installed. And because network traffic happens and downloads take time, as an admin doing real work and trying to understand the current state of your devices, you might ask again and again, did that thing that I care about, did it actually happen? How about now? Maybe I'll check again tomorrow. In traditional MDM, we get acknowledgments when commands have been received or completed, and we get a lot of information back from the device when we ask, but we have to ask repeatedly. And we get a lot of duplicative information back repeatedly. And if you're queuing up complex or conditional workflows, you're asking for a lot of information a lot of times. And then you're asking your management server to ingest that information and parse it, possibly do calculations against the changes that happened, which possibly result in additional queries, resulting polling. Basically, legacy MDM, traditional imperative MDM, is really, really, really chatty. And it requires a lot of resources, especially for organizations at scale. But with declarations, we can take advantage of way more detailed upfront instructions that tell the device how to behave under a set of conditions. The set of instructions combines with status reporting to alert the management server when certain values have changed on the device. So, rather than that frequent polling, back up one, rather than the frequent polling and verbose responses and reactive MDM actions based on what the device eventually reports into response to queries, the management server can simply compose a set of instructions, send that to the device, and the device can behave autonomously without nearly as much traffic back to MDM. without nearly as much calculation-intensive behavior on the management server itself to tell the device what to do next. And with status subscriptions, remember, they're basically instructions to the device that say, when this particular value changes on the device, alert my management server to the change. My new OS is version 17, because I just updated yesterday. And then with that single sparse value update for the device record, the management server can do whatever additional processing it needs to do in regard to remediation workflows, enabling or restricting access to organizational data, that kind of thing. We don't have to wait for a full inventory update. We don't have to parse out the delta of a particular value from a huge XML file. We can just designate the values that are important and tell the device to tell us when those values have changed. So remember that we started with basic declarations and status updates in Jamf Pro 10.42 last year, in Jamf School earlier this year, and as you saw in the keynote earlier today, we've taken the next step to adopt software updates by declarations available in Jamf Pro version 11 and coming soon to Jamf School. And it's really easy to see that when we're talking about what's next for MDM, we're definitely talking a lot about declarative management. Apple straight up said so. So now that we kind of understand where we've come from, where are we going? Again, do not have access to Apple's roadmap. I'm making some really educated guesses, but I'm feeling pretty confident about them. I got you there. Let's take a look at software updates, because those are kind of the topic of the day. Once you upgrade to an eligible OS, again, iOS 17 is eligible, it just came out yesterday, and then enable the new software update experience in version 11, you can use declarations to define future update behavior. So that means an admin designates a version and a local client time to enforce that version, and the client just sort of takes care of it. It's kind of magical. You can pre-configure that behavior, maybe set it up on Monday morning to take effect end of day on Friday, and you're not queuing up a bunch of commands or writing a script that chunks through smart devices or devices in a smart group. You can just define the outcome and the timing, and because you declared it, it's just going to happen. That part's cool enough, but you saw this too during the keynote. Apple took it further. End users will get client-side notification and interaction of what's happening and when they can expect that enforcement event to occur. They can also preempt it by actually clicking, do it right now, or wait until later with the local client scheduling logic. If a user defers, they get local notifications with increasing frequency as the deadline approaches. And if they straight up miss the deadline because the device is offline or powered off or whatever, once it comes back online, it will handle its own catch-up logic to enforce the update within 1 hour. And they get all of this without an admin having to compose local complex binary logic and notifications. I know there are a lot of great tools out there that handle this, but having it native in the OS is just going to be easier and kind of make it harder to avoid for the end user when compliance time rolls along. The admin defines the behavior, the end user gets information about it, and you kind of can't mess it up. It's declared, so it's going to happen. So if we extrapolate based on this information for future MDM enhancements, I expect that Apple is going to be iterating on this end user functionality. And by that I mean management actions declared to devices will permit better end user interactions over time. Exactly what that's going to look like, I couldn't say, but we know that declarations can be predefined to take effect on a schedule, and that the notifications can be leveraged to communicate outcomes of declarations to the end user. And that feels a lot like a whole lot of blue sky for Apple to do really cool things and for MDM providers to be able to build on that functionality over time. I'm actually really excited about end user interactions here. Well, what else could we expect as the protocol matures? Since I'm talking about software updates and how much the experience has improved, thankfully, this year, it's fairly safe to talk about how the experience changed just a few years ago and what that portends for the future. A lot of you have been around since before the transition to Apple Silicon processors, which means you might remember using policies or scripted commands that invoked the software update binary. That all changed with the first M1 Mac a couple of years ago. And for some context, here's a support article that Apple posted about how the behavior has changed. I'm going to underline here. For a Mac with Apple Silicon, authentication requires one or both of the following: an MDM bootstrap token for automated non-interactive updates and upgrades, requires macOS 11.2, update must be signed. The other option is a user password for local user-initiated interactive updates and upgrades. The summation of the outcome of this change is that unattended policies triggered by a script or by the local agent with root privileges basically went away. This was a rough time. And if I use this change as evidence that a local binary can't be programmatically invoked without interaction from the end user, add to that the improvements that have just come our way with software update experience being massively enhanced by declarations, my conclusion is that this is a trend. Programmatic access to certain binaries will continue to be deprecated in favor of MDM should do it instead, or the end user has to interact with admin rights to make it happen. Why would this change be a thing? I'm taking some guesses about Apple's roadmap, but they're pretty good ones. It's easy to see, particularly from a security perspective, why Apple would make these choices. Say a user inadvertently downloads an app with malware bundled in it. When they install it, the payload wants to access a local binary outside of the app bundle to change its privileges or get access beyond the sandbox. If you have to stop and enter a password to do that, that might just be enough friction to prevent the ultimate invocation of that malicious binary action. We also saw a similar change in regard to kernel extensions and the extra burden that was required for an end user to install them without MDM intervention. Again, I'm highlighting here. The shorthand for this change is that kernel extensions aren't recommended for macOS. They put the integrity of the OS at risk. Therefore, to install one, you end up either having to explicitly allow them by MDM, or the end user has to explicitly intervene to make them happen, similar to the behavior that we saw with software updates. One more example, again, sort of iterating on the trend. You may be used to doing a little bit of file trickery to force a device to go back through the setup assistant by deleting the .applesetup.done file. Coming up in macOS Sonoma, deleting that file won't get you back up to the setup assistant if a local user already exists. So you have to use the erase command by MDM or use that local user account to invoke erase all content and settings. The point of all of these examples is, being built on Unix, macOS is extremely powerful. And while being able to access those low-level binaries or individual files to invoke system actions offers a ton of administrative flexibility, it also widens the window of overall risk. So I expect that we're going to see more actions that are administrative that will ultimately require MDM commands to invoke without user interaction. Or, again, the user will explicitly have to interact to make it go. To sum up, administrative actions will increasingly require proper administrative tooling. And I predict that you're going to need MDM to do more things that you're used to scripting. But I also think that there's going to be an increasing demand for, degrees of administration. So you can already see the differentiation between a personally owned device and an organizationally owned one. This is kind of an interesting evolution because we all know that Apple and the enterprise have not always been the best of friends. Craig Federighi made that joke, WWDC 2019, about having two Word documents side by side on an iPad, and that's enterprisey. We've come a long way since then, but that wasn't actually that long ago. Of course, Jamf co-founder Chip Pearson liked to talk about Jamf living at the intersection of Apple and the enterprise, basically doing all the heavy lifting to allow an enterprise to trust an Apple device on the managed network accessing managed services. Again, wasn't that long ago. As Apple admins, a lot of us are very familiar with the struggle of turning the delightful consumer device into a device that meets enterprise standards. My personally owned Mac, I'm the admin. I can use my personal Apple ID to get my personal iCloud documents, my personal photos, my personally owned apps. I can install whatever I want. Ask me for my admin password when I try to test questionable workflows or install software from sketchy places. It's mine. I can do all of those things. But for a device that has to access organizational information and attain and maintain some level of assurance and trustability, we're seeing a management experience that has an increasing amount of nuance. There's the straight up bring your own device workflow with user enrollment that has a deliberately limited subset of MDM functionality and visibility. Management can do some stuff, but user data is ignored and user choices aren't arbitrarily overridden by a management command, like managing an unmanaged app, for example. And then, you heard it today during the keynote, new account-driven device enrollment experience. So for organizationally owned devices that, for reasons, didn't get automatically enrolled at the setup assistant, once a device is enrolled with this method, a Mac actually gets supervised, which we know enables the broadest set of management actions, but it also presumes that there's some local user data rather, so it actually separates that into a different volume. So what conclusions could we draw from the account-driven workflows, consumer devices, and the future of MDM? The key is managed Apple IDs, and you heard that during the keynote as well. Managed Apple IDs unlock a lot of new workflows, and their functionality will evolve. I don't think this is a major revelation. We heard it today. We heard it during WWDC. There's a whole session about doing more with managed Apple IDs at WWDC this year. I invite you to give it a watch. Apple has clearly invested in reducing the barriers for organizations to adopt them. But to draw an additional connection to the notions of degrees of management, using a managed Apple ID at the time of enrollment helps to define what management capabilities are applied to the device. And the fact that personal Apple IDs and managed Apple IDs are starting to kind of commingle in a device experience just means that more users are going to be more inclined to bring the device they love to the work they need to do. And admins need to understand the permutations of what devices can do what and access what resources. So further, point 2 on the list here, I think we're going to continue to see these degrees of management sort of evolve as enabled by managed Apple IDs. So historically, we managed organizationally owned devices, then came along BYO, and now account-driven device enrollment. All of this relates to how a device actually gets enrolled and how much functionality does the management platform have once it gets there. Is the device supervised? Is there data separation? Ultimately, this is a really interesting time to be an Apple enthusiast in the enterprise space. We used to be kind of the subversive ones, the square pegs in the round holes, right? But for a lot of organizations, Apple is a major and legitimate enterprise choice, and in some cases might actually be the default for choice for new devices. Apple is taking to heart how people use and love their devices, and they're also demonstrating a growing understanding of enterprise requirements and complexity. So my conclusion here is that MDM and the amount and kind of management applied to a device is necessarily getting more complicated. It's not as cut and dry as it used to be, full management or nothing at all. There's an acknowledgement that end users are getting pretty savvy in regard to the collision of personal data and work data. And MDM has to offer experiences that mix and mingle enterprise needs with consumer desires. So that might be a little freaky, right? The idea that this is only going to get more complicated as we go. So I want to offset that a little bit with something that I think is actually going to get easier over time. One thing that I think is actually going to change with the evolution of MDM, in particular regard to security, is that trusted access will become a declaration rather than a series of reactions. Again, you heard it during the keynote. Trusted access is the combination of management and security solutions that ensures the right people on the right devices have the right access to resources in your organization. If you haven't checked out our webpage, please do. The link's right there. As admins, we are really used to security being a reactive process. Detect if malware is running, stop it, remove it. Detect if a user has changed a critical system setting, remove it, remediate it, report on it. And every time you're reacting, you hope that that window of opportunity for the risk that was introduced was small enough to cause no major problems, right? So what I mean by saying that trusted access will ultimately become something you declare is, as declarative management matures and offers more arbitrary interactions, admins will be able to simply define the state for compliance and devices won't be able to deviate from it. You'll trust the device out of the box because you already provided the parameters of the device's behavior. You'll trust the user's identity because you already declared the access that they should have and the factors by which they validate who they are. This is definitely a story that's still being written, but an early example that we got just this year is about managed service configurations in macOS Sonoma. The fact that you can use a declarative asset to define a tamper-resistant configuration for certain system files is really cool. It's also a bit unusual in its first iteration in that it involves uploading a zip archive to define the file or directory that you're protecting. But that's why I expect that it's going to evolve over time. And what's particularly interesting is if the asset declares a certain configuration, the OS gives precedent to that asset over the local configuration. What does that mean? Well, historically, we're familiar with the idea that the most restrictive setting wins on a device. If you set a restriction with a passcode of 8 characters and a user wants 6, the more restrictive setting is actually going to take precedence on the device. In this case, it's actually the most declared setting that wins, even if the client would default to something else. Add to the declared tamper-resistant behavior the concept of status subscriptions, which we've already discussed is a major benefit of declarative management. Just let me, the admin, decide to listen for one specific thing on a device, and then tell the management server when it changes so that I, the admin, can react to that change. Status subscriptions functionality is becoming more valuable as Apple adds to the protocol. So, for example, in macOS Sonoma, you can subscribe to background tasks that are running on a Mac. You could potentially do things like monitor whether a critical security agent has stopped running, or potentially whether a known malicious agent has popped up and started running on a system. All of this means that MDM, by way of enhancements with declarative management, will permit you as admins to make devices more secure by default, and you'll know more quickly when some vital condition changes. So, to sum up some assumptions, guesses, about how MDM will evolve, MDM will, 1, enable new forms of user interaction when invoking a workflow that uses a declaration. I'm really excited about this. I think there's going to be some really cool stuff that comes up. We know that this has already happened with software updates, and it's going to offer huge opportunities in the future. MDM will also increasingly require MDM for workflows that admins may have previously scripted to bypass user interaction. Again, we know this has happened with software updates. It stands to reason that enterprise workflows will increasingly require enterprise tools to perform them. 3, MDM will make devices more secure because you can declare their degree of compliance and simply listen for a status update if something changes. 4, MDM will offer more reason to use managed Apple IDs. Apple has offered federation options that aren't constrained by identity providers, and basically, you want to adopt managed Apple IDs, and eventually there's going to be some killer feature that will require them. And finally, MDM will differentiate further between personal and organizational functionality and data. We've seen this with the enrollment experiences evolving, and with the amount of control and visibility MDM might have being based on that enrollment. So, that's the Apple side of the story. While Apple continues to evolve MDM, let's talk a little bit about what Jamf will be doing to turn that raw functionality into problem solving for admins. Because like Chip said, we live at the intersection of Apple and the enterprise, and you all got stuff you got to get done. We've already covered software updates at some length today, but I know you definitely want to know more, so I'm going to ask you to check out the session Software Update Road Trip, which is Wednesday, tomorrow morning, session 1317. Highly recommend, do not miss. But what about all the other stuff we've been doing? Apple gave us a ton of great opportunities this year, and not all net new MDM functionality was strictly declarative. So I talked a little bit about trusted access, which is sort of a holistic approach to manage and secure devices, but to zero in on a more specific example, I'm just going to pick a new MDM feature that came out this year, which is the return to service command. And to provide a little bit of context, I just want to explain that I worked in higher education for a very long time in IT, And I've worked with a lot of customers since that time. And I know that provisioning devices is one of those major life events that you just sort of get used to planning around in the school year cadence. And I vividly remember faculty members making assumptions about how my summer must be boring. All I was doing was preparing hundreds of devices for labs and professor use, trying to get all the software that everything was needed, and so that some cases I had to build bespoke provisioning workflows to make sure that devices could be reliably reset when needed. So that initial provisioning challenge is definitely a thing, right? It's one aspect of the problem. Get the device unboxed, get it onto the network and into the zero-touch workflow that you've carefully curated. But in a lot of cases, it's actually the reprovisioning workflow that is harder to solve. A device gets returned to IT, it needs to be erased, needs to be reset for a new user. You send the MDM wipe command, or maybe you're using Jamf reset and expect a user to invoke that command, say, at the end of their work shift. And then what? Somebody, IT or field staff, has to put their hands on the device to make it join Wi-Fi, get it back through the setup assistant. In some cases, you may have set up a provisioning network with limited access and no password. That's not a great idea. Or in some cases, you're actually paying high school kids to type in a Wi-Fi password hundreds of times on the devices that happen to be warehoused in your location. This isn't fun, it's not efficient. So with return to service, Apple basically enabled an enhancement to the MDM command to send along a Wi-Fi profile at the time of wipe, so the device doesn't need hands-on intervention to get back onto the network, to get enrolled in management and get back to work. We've enabled this feature in the Jamf Pro API as of Jamf Pro 10.50. It's also available in Jamf School as of our compatibility release yesterday. We'll be bringing it to the Jamf Pro UI, as well as Jamf Setup and Jamf Reset, and the healthcare listener a little later on. Basically, you're going to have a wide variety of choices about how to use this feature. This is one of those moments when you see the feedback loop kind of pay off. Jamf builds tools for Apple admins by way of Jamf Pro and first-party apps. Apple does Apple magic. It makes those tools even more usable and more effective. And now MDM has just solved a major problem for a lot of admins. We have similar opportunities coming up to enhance tools that we've already used with great success, like self-service. We're looking forward to upcoming app installation enhancements by way of declarations that will make self-service more effective to get content to end users and make sure they understand what's available and what's in progress. And again, this is really just about iterating on a solution that we've offered for a long time. Self-service is one of the most valuable tools in the Jamf admin toolkit, and we'll be looking to MDM protocol improvements to make it even better. So let's also talk about some of the behind-the-scenes decisions that we're making to enable these workflows. If you were paying really close attention during the keynote, during the software update, declarative management highlights, you would have heard them say that this feature will be available for cloud customers running Jamf Pro version 11. You might be someone who's running Jamf Pro on-prem. You might be worried that you're going to get left behind. And I want to explain what's going on here. We are focusing on cloud-first development, and we've talked about the longevity of MDM, 13 years, the longevity of Jamf itself way before MDM ever existed, something like 20 years. Fundamentally, Jamf Pro's design hasn't wandered too far from the web app and database that it was initially conceived as over 20 years ago. We call it a monolith because every time we want to add or update a feature, we have to ship an entire Jamf Pro web app just to offer that single feature. So we're adopting the new MDM features. As we're adopting the new MDM features Apple's offering, we have to move faster. And that means breaking pieces out of the monolith. That means hosting them in trusted infrastructure so that we can secure, maintain, and update them asynchronously. That's what we've done with the new software update enhancement, and that will allow us to iterate faster. This also permits us to share workflows across our products so that we're not building MDM 3 times for Pro, School, and Now, for example. Now, that doesn't mean that those features will never find their way back into the monolith or that somehow they'll be made available alongside the monolith. We are primarily architecting solutions to support cloud infrastructure first. This will allow us to be more nimble and responsive and to iterate on Apple's new functionality more quickly. If that's something that worries you, I'm going to ask you to come see me in the expo hall at the product booth. Tomorrow, basically, I'm there all day. There's a brain date early in the morning, but I will also be in the product feedback booth, and I would love to chat with you further about this problem. And finally, I want to acknowledge that a lot of what I've just talked about represents some significant changes in how you might be doing your job day to day. I want to share a quote. This came from a UX research interview over the summer. The quote is, "Declarative management is the next direction. I don't think it will affect what I do too much. Overall, WWDC was a bunch of bright, shiny toys I won't get to play with." Again, came from a Jamf customer during a research interview over the summer. And I don't know who said it, and honestly, it doesn't really matter. This is a really common sentiment. There may be a few different things driving it. Either adoption of new workflows is slow in your organization, or maybe it'll be a while before you upgrade to an OS that can take advantage of these new features. Or maybe you're just straight up planning to ignore these new features. And I gotta say, honestly, I sympathize. Change can be really quite unsettling, and some organizations actually actively discourage and avoid it. I was historically a change-averse admin, and scripting literally everything was totally okay with me because when it fell apart, I knew who to blame, and I knew what was in the black box. I'm hoping that we can start to shake the worry about change, because in the case of MDM and how it's evolving, change is actually pretty cool. And I think we've got some really cool stuff in front of us. So I've heard from admins who are skeptical, but I think you're going to see that MDM's evolution will eventually win you over, because MDM will be more secure by permitting declarations to set compliance out of the box, and by limiting programmatic interactions with low-level binaries. MDM will be more native by enabling end-user interactions based on declarations. MDM will be more useful over time by iterating on the already strong foundation of MDM, now with added features of declarative management. And also, Jamf is here to help you use MDM to solve real-world problems, just like we have with software updates and return to service. Jamf will also help adopt new things more quickly by optimizing our architecture to iterate and deliver features faster. And at the intersection of Apple and the enterprise, Jamf will help Apple devices and Apple users be first-class citizens in the enterprise by letting you manage and secure your Apple devices to your organization's standards. That's it. My friend Rob might have some questions for me.
Oh, thank you. We do have a couple questions coming in here, and it's also to pick, but one of the questions that came in, will Jamf support all the DDM channels, like some of the other MDM vendors have said, like our kind of roadmap? You kind of answered a little bit, but I wanted to.
It is our plan to attack all of the value for declarative management. Absolutely, yes. We are starting with the high-value workflows first, which is why software updates kind of floated to the top of the list. I think everybody can agree that was a problem that needed to be solved. So yes is the short answer. We're going to be adding more functionality as we go.
Perfect. One I really like, and that's the power of the giant iPad, is one of the questions here was, how will DDM implementation will impact existing workflows in Jamf Pro when introduced? In your opinion, what key impacts are important to note?
Yeah, declarative management is both a brand new style of management, but it also exists right next to legacy MDM. So it's actually a little bit difficult to describe what the ultimate impact is going to be. But short term, we've taken very careful steps to minimize, say, a UI disruption. The software update workflow is just sort of attached to the existing software update workflow that you may have seen starting in 1049. So we're going to be very careful about how we implement that and how we display the outcomes to our admins.
Okay. Will DDM drive app management? Example, will app installers use DDM?
That's a really good question, and we are constantly trying to figure out how best to make app installers most effective. So maybe ultimately that is a thing that happens. I think that we've also discovered that app installation and the status that we get back from app installation by way of traditional imperative management, it's got some room for improvement. So I think our app installer's workflow is going to continue to fill some gaps in that space.
Okay. They get a little bit cut off here. Sorry about that. So theorizing on where Apple is going to do one thing, but when we get official notice of, sorry about that one. I think this is somewhat, okay, so this has been kind of answered already. I apologize for bringing that up. It just had a lot of votes. There's a new system too, so please bear with me. Do you foresee the Jamf binary eventually being deprecated in favor for purely DDM deployed framework?
That's a really great question, and I don't know how to answer it today. In years and years, it might be that we get everything we need from pure MDM, and a binary doesn't actually add any value, but I think that's a ways off yet, so we got a minute.
Okay, now all the questions are coming in, so it's before this. What about if a network, I think this has to kind of refrain to return to service, so not really, but I think for a question like this, I will write back on that one and let someone know. Having custom declarations available for us to write so that so we can be alerted to arbitrary change will be important to us. Is it a possibility in the future? And I'm sorry for misreading that one, but it started to move as I was reading it. So
I'm pretty sure I get that one. So the idea would be, hey, it would be really cool to subscribe to arbitrary values on a device and say, I want to watch this particular thing. And I agree, and I'm looking to our friends at Apple to help us with that.
Okay. Got another one here. In an event of a failure, scripting methods allow us the verbosity, logs, and troubleshooting. How does one begin troubleshooting DDM-based failures if we cannot directly adjust anything within that framework?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So admins, like I said, for a long time have kind of relied on the idea of scripting is the ultimate answer because I have ultimate transparency. I sympathize, have been there, done that. I think that there are opportunities for Apple to both improve reporting and logging back in regard to how MDM works. And I also think that they need our feedback collectively to really enhance that to meet our needs. So this is one of those opportunities to talk to both Jamf and Apple about the thing that would accomplish your requirements.
Perfect, thank you. And more flying in. Will on-prem environments be able to get, yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about that one, but I will check that in the comments. Maybe I'll answer comments. There will be an on-prem installer for Jamf Pro 11, but it's more about the other stuff on the side. So I have one here. When you schedule an update, but a device has a deferral profile, what does the end user see? Can we still block manual updates? And that's just working for what we know a little bit now and a little bit off topic.
Well, so it's a valid question. Deferrals, as previously configured, will continue to be honored, but also the declaration enforcement will also be honored as well. So it's something that you'll want to test in terms of, like, when I want somebody to upgrade to .next, do I need to actually adjust the deferral workflow? I don't think you will. So,
and remember, the deferral profile you put down doesn't let the user see the update, but if then you declare an update, that update will happen.
What he said. Thank you. We're pretty much at time, and
Yep.
I know that everybody's probably eager to get off to lunch. Again, I will be in the product, the expo hall tomorrow, pretty much all day. If you want to talk this over, ask any other questions, I would love to hear them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just an FYI, you do need to leave this room when we're finished. And it just has to do on resetting the room and everything else. So please, when this talk is over, please